Finally going to walk you through how to make a brisket. I've done a few videos at this point and I couldn't be more excited to walk you through this and show you how I like my brisket prepared. Here we have a certified Angus choice brisket that we're going to be using. So first thing to do is to trim the fat cap down. We're going to bring it down to about 1/4 inch for 2 reasons. First, you just don't want to bite into that much fat. These tend to come in with about 3/4 to 1 inch of fat cap on top. And then second, the smoke infusion in the first part of the smoking process, getting those flavors into the meat. If there's too much fat cap on there, it's going to take a longer time and you're just not going to get as many of those flavors into the meat. And obviously when we're smoking brisket, that's what we want. Now there are 2 parts of the brisket. There's the flat, which is over here, which kind of runs underneath. And then there's the point, which is over here. Now there's 2 different grains of meat, and when I say that, think about like wood grain, the way the wood flows. The flat is going to be running this way, and the point is going to be running this way. So we're not going to take the fat that separates the 2 pieces, but we're just going to take the top, and then I'm going to flip it over again, and I'm going to look at the bottom to make sure we just don't have any excess fat that, you know, is kind of meaningless to the point of the flavor. So there's a little piece of extra meat over here that we just don't need. And you can see that just kind of extra, there's no meat in there, so we're just getting rid of stuff that we don't want. Now I have a butcher's knife here, which is just what I prefer to use. You can also use a boning knife or a flex boning knife. Both will do the same thing. Just make sure it's really sharp so that it cuts through a little easier. Working with a dull knife is actually more dangerous, and you tend to slip and cut yourself more often with a dull knife than you would with a sharp knife. Another tip with this is using cold meat. Cold meat, the fat's going to be stiffer and it'll be easier to cut through. If your meat is warm or kind of not that fridge, 36-degree temperature range, the fats will start not melting, but they'll be a little slimier, a little slipperier, and they're generally more hard to work with. So this can take a while because you kind of got to figure out where the meat is versus the fat, and every brisket is different. So you just gotta, you can see here I got a little bit too deep, which just pull back and then reassess and keep trimming. One thing to remember is you can always trim more. You can't put fat back on. So when you're trimming, you can move with the meat, kind of angle yourself so you can see what's going on, but also you can move the meat itself. So I kind of like, when I'm working on this big fat side, kind of like going away and cutting away from myself rather than toward myself. Just, I think it's a comfort reason, but it's also a safety thing. Don't want to be bringing a knife towards you if you can avoid it at all. So the top looks pretty good at this point. Now over here, you're gonna feel a real heavy and hard fat part. That actually kind of goes in, up and in. I can take some of this off, but it goes up and in, and that's the fat part that separates the point and the flat. So I'm gonna take a little bit off, but I'm not gonna dig into the brisket itself to try and get that out, because once again, that's gonna bleed into the meat and give us some flavor. And we'll cut that out later when we're carving. And that's about where I'm going to stop right there, because if I go any deeper, I'm going to be cutting into the bulk of the brisket itself, and I just don't want to do that. You want to keep it as whole as possible. And once you get into this meat, you can see a little better where the flat part is and how that grain runs like this. And then right here, unfortunately, where I dug a little too deep, you can see where the grain goes this way. So these 2 are sitting like this. So, and that's fine, that's the way it is. But once it's all smoked and we start slicing, that's when we're gonna separate those 2 pieces. Because just like any roasted or smoked meat, you wanna cut against the grain for tenderness and palatability, just the way it chews. For our seasoning, we're gonna be using our Texas Rodeo Rub. It's basically designed for briskets. It has brown sugar, chili peppers, pepper, garlic, all the good stuff that you want in a standard beef brisket rub. You can obviously use this on different stuff, but we are going to use it in the classic application today. So when we're seasoning, we're just going to pour it on, and we're going to let that sit for a little while so that those flavors can absorb and stick to the meat. And then after that, we'll be ready for the smoker. So once again, we're just going to give it a nice, healthy dusting. Don't be shy, because you want it to get in all those nooks and crannies, because all those little surface area spots are opportunities for seasoning and flavor. So you put some in your hand and just kind of rub it along the side. Flip it over and get the other side as well. Nice healthy amount of rub. Might seem like a lot, but then you got to take into consideration how much meat we actually have too. This is what started out as a 16-pound brisket, so it takes a lot of seasoning to season that much meat. So don't be afraid. Then as soon as you think you're done, use some of those seasonings that fell off and just really rub it in, kind of move that meat around, manipulate it, and get into those nooks and crannies again. All right, we're well seasoned, so I'm gonna let this sit out for about an hour, get it close to room temperature before it goes on the smoker. Again, the reason, some moisture will start coming out of the meat, and that'll absorb and blend with that seasoning to adhere, and then it'll be ready for the smoker. And when I'm ready, I'm gonna throw this on the PK100 through Pro Smoker, which is available at psseasoning.com. It is a electric smoker which uses sawdust. And it's a really sturdy insulated cabinet that's really great for long-term smokes, like for brisket or pork and things of that nature. All right, so we're filling our Pro Smoker PK100 with our briskets today, and we're putting them directly on the racks, fat cap down to start. We've got our pan of water to keep some moisture in the smoker. And then for sawdust, we're using a basic hardwood blend, which is pretty standard when it comes to brisket. You just gotta add some water and let that soak in so it doesn't all burn up in the smoker right away. And I set my alarm for about 2:30 in the morning so I could come out and check. What we're looking for is for a temperature of 165, and that means it's time to wrap. I'm gonna wrap it in butcher paper here, kind of a crisscross pattern. Now wrapping is going to help retain moisture and that beautiful, delicious bark that we're looking for. I'm going to double wrap it, and I'm going to put that fold side down when I put it back in the smoker. And in the morning, we're looking for a final temperature anywhere between 200 and 205 degrees. And at that point, we're going to set it in a cooler to rest. We want it to rest for at least an hour, preferably 2. Moment of truth. This has been smoking. This took about 16, 17 hours. It smells amazing, and I'm really excited to unwrap this, so let's see what we got. I mean, feels perfect. Oh yeah, that's gonna be okay. Got nice bark. Got the juices flowing, still nice and hot because it's burning my hands. So at first glance, it's bouncy, which means the fat content is still there. It's bleeding some fat out, which means some of that fat is rendered, giving us more flavor in with the meat. The bark looks good. It's not just rubbing off, it's adhered and it's sticky. So I'm gonna slice it up and we're gonna eat it. I'm gonna eat so much brisket, it's gonna be great. First, I'm going to find my grain, and like I talked about before, there are 2 grains here. There's the flat, which is going to go one direction, and then there's the point, which is going to be going a different direction. We are going to separate these 2 pieces once we get sliced so far in on the flat. Our flat is going this way, and our point, just get in there, is going this way. So they're sitting on top of each other, and there is a fat cap that separates the 2. I'm not just gonna start digging in there all willy-nilly trying to find that fat cap. I'm gonna get in on the flat side till I hit that fat, and then I'll easily be able to find the separation. And if we cooked it right, I should be able to just use my hand to separate and pull those 2 apart. So I'm gonna start on this end where our grain is going this way. I'm gonna cut against, and the best part is this little nub right here. I remember this from my days working at a barbecue restaurant, and it's just got real nice juice, but it's like got all this beautiful dark bark on there. So that's gonna be the first piece we try. It's tender, there's juiciness in there, you can see it. It's really good. It's beefy, it's salty, it's savory. Tiniest hint of heat. Got amazingly good smoke. So I'm really happy. Let's get further into it and see what we got. Against the grain, about 1/4 inch slices. Some people like big hunks and kind of shredding it. That works too. I like the thinner. That way you can lay a few slices out on a plate and people can grab it. And you can almost hear me cutting into it. I don't know if audio's picking that up. So if the brisket can, about a 1/4 inch slice can hold up under its own weight, and then just with a real gentle pull, break, that's really what you're looking for. So this turned out really well. The part that everybody shows on social media, and you don't want to do it too much, but this is kind of where those juices are coming out. If you give it a little squeeze, that just means that fat rendered and is getting back into the meat itself, which is just, as we all know, adding tons and tons of flavor. That's beautiful. So like I said, I don't want to do that too much because we do want it to stay on top of there and we don't want to squeeze it out, but it's kind of fun to see. All right, I'm getting to that point where excuse my pun, getting to that point where the point is separating from the flat, and we can see the fat separating the two. So I'm gonna give it another slice or two, but that's when I'm gonna take the point off because those different grains, I wanna cut them perpendicularly and I don't want any lines going with our cuts. Here you can see that point is starting to fall off before I even get through the slice. It's because the grain is going a different way. Those are still really good slices though. It's still gonna be plenty tender and delicious. It just holds up better if you bring them apart. Okay, so I'm in there, you can see, and you can use the back of the knife because it's still pretty hot, and just go in there and let the fat lead you where you're going. And you're almost through. Here, again, this grain is going separately in a different direction. I'm gonna set this aside. We'll cut it after we're done with the flat. I think it was a 16.5 pound brisket, so this is a big boy. So it did take quite a long time to smoke. And general rule of thumb is allow that resting time for a good hour to 2 hours after it's done smoking, so those juices can get reabsorbed into the meat. So make sure you put that in your planning process if you're trying to eat at a specific time. It is about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes per pound, smoked at 250 degrees. Now all these little shreddables here, that's obviously still gonna be saved because that can go into a stew, that can go into a shredded beef sandwich, just anything you would do with kind of pot roast type stuff. Now for our point, I am gonna take some of this fat off. It's just excessive. Some people like it. I personally don't. I'm not gonna take it all off, but I'm gonna trim that down a little bit. Basically, once your fingers can start feeling meat through the fat, that's where you wanna stop. And we'll get to my favorite part of the brisket in just a second here as well. Okay, so our grain here is going this way, so we're gonna cut perpendicular again. Start slicing, and that's gonna be another great burnt end type piece. That it's gonna have some more marbling in it, so that's just gonna have even more flavor. So the point side of the brisket generally has more fat to begin with, it has more marbling, so a lot of people prefer this side of the brisket. And up here, there's a kind of a fat side of it, and that's my favorite part because it's really well marbled, and you get just a real nice even flavor and texture in there. And look at that, you can see it just kind of pulls apart. It's got all that flavor in there. Let's see what we got. The only negative I would take away from this one is not as much of a smoke ring as I would want, but there's certainly enough smoke flavor, so it's just a visual aspect. That 16-pound brisket turned into probably 8 pounds, maybe even 9 pounds of cut meat. So, I mean, you're looking at feeding 20 people if you ration, and you're looking at feeding 8 if you don't. All right, I'm gonna feed this to some hungry people. For this recipe and more, including links to where you can purchase Texas Rodeo Rub, head to psseasoning.com. Until next time, I'm Chef Jed. Thank you for watching.